Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 318. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Got some news on Russia and China on today's show and the impact of the U.S. policy pushing those two great powers together. So, a lot to break down on today's show. Be sure to share the show. You find it at the Libertarian Institute, the blog on antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version of the show. You could also find the show anywhere you can listen to audio podcast, and you can support the show by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. Paloma Verde has a wide selection of high-quality CBD products. They put their lab test results right there on the website. Anything that you want CBD-wise, you could find at Paloma Verde, including their new full spectrum products that give you quite a great feeling and really help, I think, enhance some of the great effects that other CBD products have. So check out all the great products they have at Paloma Verde. Just be sure to use the promo code PEACE when you check out, PEACE. That will save you 20% when you check out, and it will get the show a kickback. And so great way to help your favorite podcast and help yourself out. All right, now let's get into the show. I wanted to start off today by talking about a few domestic issues. Usually the show's all foreign policy, but occasionally want to mix it up and throw in a couple important stories of things going on here in the U.S. And the first is this really interesting, terrible thing that happened, but the response is interesting how this all plays out. So in July, a group of Denver police officers, or at least one police officer, saw a man carrying a gun in a crowd, and then a group of cops responded by opening fire and injuring 6 people. Rather than addressing the police officers who fired on the innocent people, the conduct of the police officers, the city has responded by restricting where food trucks can operate, and it blamed, more or less the crowd of food trucks. So Fiona Harang, writing at Reason, explains how Denver's new policy hurts business owners and immigrants. She writes, at 1:30 a.m. on July 17th, Denver Police Department officers were monitoring crowds of people departing nightclubs. They witnessed an altercation involving Jordan Wadi, with one officer observing he may have a firearm concealed in his hoodie or waistband. An officer saw Wadi reaching into his waistband or pocket in a motion consistent with pulling out a firearm, so the cop began to shoot. Body cam later revealed that Wadi removed his handgun from his hoodie and tossed it to the ground. 6 bystanders were injured in the ordeal. Following the shooting, Denver officials wanted to find a way to combat crime downtown, so even though the police admitted they did something wrong from tactics standpoint, the city has moved to ban food trucks operating in lower downtown on Thursday, Fridays, and Saturdays. Officials touted moving the food trucks off the streets as a way to decrease crowds, chaos, and crime, according to the Denver-based outlet Westward. Food truck owners were instead forced to park blocks away from the area, much further from the bars and their crowds. The truck owners weren't consulted and now worry how they'll stay afloat without profitable weekend slots. And the article goes on to talk about how a lot of these food truck owners who are impacted are immigrants. And so, it's a real shame. I live in the Denver area, and it's pretty clear that, some cops around here do some things that are pretty out of control, and so the police departments need to be addressed. This is unfortunate because a lot of people like the food trucks around here, and, it provides a pretty cool scene and a pretty cool variety of food. Next article, I want to talk about the ACLU sues Arizona over a law that criminalizes filming cops. The ACLU and media groups have filed a lawsuit against the state of Arizona. The lawsuit alleges the state's law that prevents filming within 8 feet of a police officer is a constitutional First Amendment right to record. The plaintiffs hope to prevent the law from taking effect in September, and so my understanding is at this point they're seeking an injunction to prevent even having to deal with the law, but if it does come up, then hopefully they will be able to sue and protect our First Amendment rights here. I know there's a lot you could complain that you could do about the ACLU, but occasionally they do really important work too. The next article I want to talk about is from my news roundup on August 10th, and originally written at Reason, but I just have the little summary in the news roundup, and that's the Biden administration yesterday urged a federal judge to dismiss a lawsuit challenging the ban on gun possession by medical marijuana users, saying the law is consistent with a long tradition of firearm regulation in the United States. This is a real problem. You cannot criminalize any kind of health, and so I feel the same way, and I think this is a big problem with a lot of the regulations they have on people who have mental health, who are far more likely, if you have a serious mental health issue like a schizophrenia, bipolar, or something like that, you're far more likely to be the victim of a violent crime than you are to perpetrate one. And so I think a lot of the laws preventing these people from carrying guns is unfair, and now we're seeing it crop up in the medical marijuana issue. And these are a lot of people who take medical marijuana, do it because it improves the quality of their lives, and taking something that improves the quality of your life shouldn't mean that you have to sacrifice one of your rights in exchange. I would be just as disgusted if, say, it was contingent, like if you are on medical marijuana, then because you could possibly be high and could cast a vote for the wrong person or something, then you can't have a right to vote. That's obviously absurd, and we shouldn't base anything on just medical issues and what kind of medications you take. Two more stories, more domestic based. The IRS is reviewing safety and security measures in response to what it claims is misinformation about the agency on social media. This is from Reuters. The agency goes on to claim that, this is a real problem for their agency and the safety of the people who work for the IRS. This is, I think, a real concern. I think what could happen here is the IRS could basically use this to go to Facebook, to go to Twitter, and force those companies to enforce the narrative that is most beneficial to the IRS as what has to be said about the IRS on Twitter, because if not, it puts the safety of agents at risk. And this is, I think one of the giant concerns about the government panic about misinformation is we're going to see more and more of this, where the government claims that, its agents are at risk because of misinformation, and therefore we have to regulate everything that says about our agencies. And the last story I have here, also from Reason Magazine, the government of Las Vegas destroyed tiny homes that were made available to the homeless because they did not meet minimum home size requirements. And so this guy has taken several efforts to basically set up tiny homes for the homeless people. And initially, I think he did it on public land, and so they got rid of it. And then he did it on, I forget what it was, but he's basically gone through 3 iterations of this. And this last time, these tiny homes were actually built on private land, and the government still said, well, they don't meet our minimum standards for housing regulations and all that, and so it doesn't count. So now these homeless people are out living on the street, likely committing trespassing crimes and loitering crimes. Technically, they could be harassed by the police, living in tents, just sleeping under the stars and blankets and things like that, all because the government said, well, you couldn't sleep in this little box. Which, look, a 50 square foot essential shed isn't a great living condition. There's no doubt about that. But, you got to look at comparatives here, and certainly better off sleeping there than sleeping, again, without any kind of roof over your head. Next article I have, and now moving into Russia, China, some great power stuff, but this specifically on the war in Ukraine. This from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. IAEA sends team to Ukraine to inspect Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, that is the ZNPP nuclear facility that is in Russian-occupied Ukraine. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has sent a team of inspectors to Ukraine to inspect the ZNPP. IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi said on Twitter Monday that the inspectors will be at the plant later this week. The ZNPP has been controlled by Russian forces since March. The plant has recently been the site of frequent shelling, raising fears of potential nuclear nuclear disaster. The Ukraine has blamed the shelling on Russia, but Moscow has little reason to attack a nuclear power plant that it controls. Russian officials have been calling for the IAEA inspection team to visit the plant, saying the inspectors will be able to see that Ukrainian forces have been behind recent attacks. Both Russia and Ukraine welcomed the IAEA's announcement. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry said the IAEA inspectors were set to arrive in Kiev on Monday. From the Ukrainian capital, the inspectors will travel to the ZNPP, which is located near the southeastern Zaporizhia Oblast. So that we'll see what comes out of that. The IAEA can be somewhat political, but I do expect that they will issue at least maybe not a report that's damning of Ukraine, but at least one that doesn't make up facts. All right, next up, U.S. to appoint new Arctic ambassador with eye on Russia. And I think this is where we really starting to get into, our conversation and great power competition today. The U.S. will appoint, this was announced on Friday, a new ambassador to the Arctic, a region the U.S. military and NATO view as a potential battleground with Russia. U.S. Arctic policy is currently handled by an official in the State Department, but the Biden administration wants to establish a full ambassador, which would require Senate approval. The U.S. and its NATO allies are looking to expand their military footprints in the Arctic and improve the military alliance's territory in the region could increase if Sweden and Finland's memberships are approved. Russia has a massive Arctic coast that stretches almost 1,500 miles across the Arctic Circle. NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg said that Russia's capabilities in the Arctic are a strategic challenge for the military alliance. Stoltenberg made the comments while in Canada, where he welcomed Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's plan to increase spending for NORAD, a joint U.S.-Canadian military command meant to provide air protection for the two nations. The NATO chief and Trudeau visited the Canadian military base in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut, above the Arctic Circle, where the air defense radar for NORAD is located. Earlier this year, Canadian military leaders said the Russian invasion of Ukraine requires more spending on Arctic capabilities. The U.S. military is preparing for a future conflict in the Arctic with Russia, as well as China, by revamping forces in the region. The U.S. Army released a strategy document last year that said the Arctic is the potential to become a contested space where the United States' great power rivals Russia and China seek to use military and economic power to gain and maintain access to the region at the expense of U.S. interests. And China really is apparently trying to lay claims to the Arctic. And so, there are some issues there. If you look at the map, the geology really doesn't play out, but the same geography. But at the same time, again, looking at this, it does seem that this could be a major source of tension in the new Cold War. So the U.S. has been really trying to wrap its military alliances kind of together and take on the great power competition with its partners in Southeast Asia and with its NATO allies. And we're seeing an example of this now. I wrote this article for the Libertarian Institute on August 25th. Pitch Black 2022. American F-35s take part in 17-nation war games. Washington and several close partners kicked off massive aerial military exercises in Australia. The F-35s from the U.S. and Britain will join advanced warplanes from India, Japan, South Korea, France, and several other countries. A NATO press release on the war games, dubbed Pitch Black 2022, says the war drills will involve about 100 aircraft and 2,500 military personnel from 17 nations in Australia's Northern Territory. The exercises last took place in 2018. The Pitch Black 2020 was canceled due to the pandemic. So these are biannual war games, so they take place on even number years. And I will note that I saw a bunch of different numbers for the number of nations taking part. It went up to 18 and was as low as 14. I'm not sure, maybe there's a couple nations observing, but the NATO press release it likely has it right, and it's 17. The war games began last Friday as tensions in the Indo-Pacific continued to soar. The pitch black drills involved all four members of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad. The Quad is an anti-China cooperation forum for the U.S., India, Japan, and South Korea. America's NATO partners, Germany, France, and the UK, are also taking part. A recent NATO security document says China poses a systematic challenge to Euro-Atlantic security, even though, of course, China is located, as South China Sea, the Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, absolutely nowhere near the Euro-Atlantic. Members have increasingly taken a hostile position towards Beijing. Over the past few years, several European countries have joined the U.S. in conducting freedom of navigation operations and Taiwan's trade transits. China views Taiwan and the South China Sea as its territory. Canada, France, Malaysia, Netherlands, New Zealand, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and the UAE are also participating. Germany, Japan, and the Republic of Korea are participating fully for the first time. The war games will last until September 18th. Washington has conducted a series of war games in the Pacific recently. In Hawaii, South Korea and Tokyo joined American forces in missile detection exercises. On Monday, the U.S. started large-scale war games in South Korea. Still, some in Washington are demanding more military operations in the region. Representative Gregory Meeks called for war games between the U.S. and Japan. Greater military-to-military cooperation, including joint exercises, could certainly be a part of the equation, he said, reflecting the view that deepening U.S. ties with Japan, between the U.S. and Japan will act as a deterrent against China. So, I think this is really important. It's going to be seen by China as really important. And what it's going to do is China is going to say, well, if the U.S. is basically taking all of its allies and aligning them against us, then it's only going to make sense for China to work more closely with Russia. And we're seeing more and more of that. In fact, there's going to be massive war games kicked off between Russia and China coming up. A few stories from the news roundup that I put out today at the Libertarian Institute, and that is that Russia and China will kick off massive war games. It's going to involve 50,000 troops. I think it'll mostly take place in eastern Russia. And, there's probably some significance there and some signals from Moscow that, of course, are far too nuanced for anybody in Washington to pick up on. But for a long, long time, and even when I started this show and even in early episodes of this show, I was dismissive of the potential for a close relationship between Moscow and Beijing because there are a lot of systemic issues between those two countries. Longtime neighbors, they share a very long border, a lot of history, and a lot of people think that China wants eastern Russia. And so for Russia to allow thousands of Chinese soldiers to enter eastern Russia is probably somewhat significant and a signal that Putin and Xi are trying to send to the rest of the world that, again, may be too nuanced for anybody to really pick up. But I do think it's going to potentially, be a real signal that these two countries are moving closer together. And the U.S., in almost a way of a self-fulfilling prophecy, has been so hostile towards both Russia and China that they've almost done the impossible in driving Beijing and Moscow together. Now, a couple other stories from the news roundup today. The Biden administration is planning to ask Congress to approve a $1.1 billion arms sale to Taiwan that includes anti-ship missiles and anti-air missiles. Politico reported on Monday, citing sources with knowledge of the weapons package. And then we have this from the South China Morning Post. UK Foreign Minister Liz Truss says she will name China a threat if she becomes prime minister. China dismissed Truss's statement. So, good that we got that response from China and that they're not raising alarm. Maybe they will when Truss is likely made the prime minister. And now it's also important to note that she is the foreign minister as well. And so even if she doesn't become the prime minister and take over the country, she's got to have a heavy hand in guiding, London's foreign policy. And we continue to have Chinese warplanes cross the median line. This time, Taiwan says it was a total of 12. Let's see. I think there's a few more stories that I want to touch on here from nope, I believe that's actually all I have on today's show. I know it's a little bit of a shorter show today, but we've been covering a lot here on the past couple of episodes, and Connor has a bunch of articles to come on and break down. So, again, I have a lot more content for you all this week. I've been on several episodes of Around the Empire lately, a show hosted by my friend Joanne Leon. One episode we co-hosted together with Armchair Warlord. Another episode she interviewed me. I believe we are going to record another episode together this week, and so that should be out shortly. Definitely subscribe to Around the Empire if you're not already. Also, I was just today, that is August 30th, on Fault Lines, so I'm pretty sure you could still find Fault Lines on YouTube and Rumble. Definitely you could find Fault Lines and check out and listen to my interview there. I think it went really well. We discussed my recent article on the U.S. or not U.S. the Western narrative pushing that's been going on social media, and the study that's uncovering that. So anyways, hope you all are enjoying the show. Share it and follow me on Twitter at Kyle Anzalone _. Thanks everyone.